Hello and welcome back to Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. If you're new to the series, check out our 1778 episode, where we left off with an unprecedented British assault on the South. Now let's get into the episode. "4 years into this fight for freedom, our young nation stands at a crossroads. The British have shifted their focus to the south, while France's navy has arrived to help the American cause. This year, Spain is set to join the war against Britain, and Congress wrestles with a shaky economy. Tension increases against Native Americans in response to last year's massacres, plus we review the state of the states and their constitutions. It's a year of escalation, and we're still just getting started. Welcome to 1779 in America." It's January 1st in the United States of America, and snow blankets Morristown, New Jersey, where Washington is overseeing the winter quarters established last month. He issues orders from his headquarters assigning General Major Israel Putnam to command troops in Connecticut and directing preparations for the 1779 campaign season. The army is in a defensive posture, training and awaiting supplies amidst harsh winter conditions. Over in the recently liberated Philadelphia, streets buzz with activity as Congress, back from York, grapples with war costs. Continental dollars are nearly worthless, and bartering is not going to last long as supplies are running out, with imports being all but totally blocked. In Savannah, British Colonel Archibald Campbell consolidates control, recruiting loyalists and repairing defenses. On January 17th, he departs Savannah with 1,000 troops marching towards Augusta, where Patriot control persists under local militia, as Benjamin Lincoln positions his army at Perrysburg, South Carolina, 40 miles east of Savannah. On the 29th, Campbell takes Augusta, establishing British control with minimal resistance. He fortifies Fort Augusta and begins recruiting loyalists, aiming to rally 1,400 men. Meanwhile, out west, George Rogers Clark, who's currently in Kaskaskia, receives intelligence from Francis Vigo, a fur trader from St. Louis. Vigo gives him some detailed information about British Lieutenant Governor Henry Hamilton's reoccupation of Fort Sackville at Vincennes. He reports a force of about 80 British regulars, 100 French militia, and 400 Indian allies, along with mentioning the fort's poor condition. Clark decides to launch a surprise winter expedition to recapture Vincennes, beginning preparations almost immediately. Back east, Washington departs Philadelphia to rejoin the army, focusing on preparations for the upcoming campaign season on February 1st. And 2 days later, Congress takes desperate action. They pass a resolution requesting the states provide $45 million in continental currency over the year, alongside additional supplies like flour, pork, and rum. Congress has been issuing similar requests since '75, but compliance has been spotty. States like Virginia and Massachusetts are stretched thin by local militia demands and British raids, so they often ignore or short these requests, prioritizing their own survival. The lack of tax power stems from the recent Articles of Confederation, deliberately designed to keep states sovereign. Article 8 states that expenses shall be defrayed out of a common treasury, which shall be supplied by the several states, and goes on to say that the allotment of money owed is based on land value, a system that proves to be a logistical nightmare. No mechanism exists to enforce payment, and states tend to bicker over the federal assessments. Additionally, while the articles are generally honored, they're not technically binding as they have not yet been ratified by enough states. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia in particular fears anything resembling British taxation, while others see chaos as inevitable without it. These debates, often stretching late into the night, are heated, but for now, don't achieve any resolution. For a while now, we've remained focused on describing revolutionary battles, often describing patriots as somewhat of a monolith, which they are far from, as Congress continually proves. Across the 13 states, political factions shape competing visions of governance amid the war's turmoil. State constitutions and laws mirror this diversity, forging distinct paths for suffrage representation and rights as farmers, merchants, and militiamen navigate a fragmented republic. Factions in 1779 remain loosely defined, but one group, who we will retroactively call moderates, conservatives, or the small r Republicans, the leaders of which are a coalition of landowners and traders like James Wilson, John Adams, George Clinton, and Roger Sherman, prize individual rights and economic freedom. They view the radical fervor sweeping Pennsylvania with suspicion, favoring a governance model that protects their interests against the whims of the masses. Another group, constitutionalists, thrive in Pennsylvania's radical climate and often rally behind leaders like Joseph Reed, Thomas Paine, and Timothy Matlack, championing broad suffrage and price controls to shield the common man. Their vision seeks a government responsive to artisans and farmers, not just the well-to-do landowners and merchants. The Articles of Confederation reflect these ideals with a delicate balance, granting Congress war and diplomacy powers but leaving taxation to the states. This framework is a source of contention, as those in favor of republicanism or conservatism push for more cohesive trade policies between states, while constitutionalists carefully guard state autonomy, wary of distant authority. In the various states and their constitutions, we see the effects of these and other schools of thought. Pennsylvania's 1776 Constitution opens suffrage to all white male taxpayers over the age of 21. A unicameral legislature elected yearly is checked only by a weak Supreme Executive Council. In Massachusetts, governing takes place through a bicameral legislature and a governor with veto power. Suffrage is tied to property. Freeholders worth £60 or taxpayers with £3 of reported income may vote. Under their 1776 Constitution, Virginia has a bicameral legislature which requires voters to own 25 acres or pay taxes on 25 pounds of property. New York also has a bicameral legislature, and its 1777 Constitution splits suffrage by office. Freeholders worth £20 or more vote for assemblymen, but only freeholders worth £100 or more can vote for senators and the governor. North Carolina's 1776 Constitution established a bicameral legislature that elects a weak governor, and freeholders with 50 acres or taxpayers vote for the House, but senators need 300 acres. South Carolina's 1778 Constitution established a bicameral legislature which elects a president with veto power. Only white men with 50 acres or £2 in taxes may vote. In Georgia, its 1777 Constitution states that the citizens elect a unicameral legislature that governs with a weak executive council. Only white males with £10 of property or taxable skills can vote. Connecticut, operating largely under its 1662 charter with some 1776 tweaks, grants suffrage only to freeholders worth £40 or taxpayers with £2 of income. A bicameral General Assembly, elected twice yearly, governs with a strong council. Rhode Island, using its 1663 charter, also adjusted in 1776, grants suffrage to freeholders with £40 of estates or £2 in rental income. A unicameral assembly, elected biannually, holds power, with a weak governor chosen by the state legislatures. In New Jersey, people with £50 in property or money vote. Notably, not specifically barring unmarried women and black people, through its vague language. Their 1776 Constitution outlines a bicameral legislature with an annually elected council and assembly that balances the weak governor. Maryland's 1776 Constitution grants governance to a bicameral legislature, with senators required to own 1,000 acres, electing a governor. Suffrage demands 50 acres or 30 pounds in property. Delaware's 1776 Constitution states that voters need 50 acres or 40 pounds in property, and a bicameral legislature elects a president with veto power. Finally, New Hampshire's 1776 Constitution opens suffrage to all tax-paying white males over 21, and a unicameral legislature governs with a weak council. The conservatives, largely urbanites and planters, prioritize property and trade, while constitutionalists, rooted in militia and frontier towns, push for populist rule. Who's granted suffrage is an issue that crosses the aisle, as does the debate over whether or not Congress should operate independently or in conjunction with a second chamber. This backdrop of varying visions for America's system of government and its future continues to take the back seat in our story until the war ends, as it does for many Americans struggling to put food on the table and ensure their families' safety. But differing opinions between the states on how and by who they wish to be governed, while slowing some federal development, ultimately ensures that states aim to please their citizens and maintain balance, fearing a loss in population and thus power should their government go too far in either direction. Now, back to our story, where on February the 6th, Clark departs Kaskaskia on foot with his main force, beginning a 180-mile march across the Illinois wilderness, enduring severe weather, melting snow and cold rain, which causes widespread flooding. They cross the Little Wabash River, wading through chest-deep water, and upon reaching the Imbra River, flooding forces them to build makeshift rafts for their supplies in order to cross. With another week of brutal trekking to go, Clark maintains morale by ordering hunting parties for fresh food amid dwindling supplies, and encourages his men to sing, despite their exhaustion. On February 10th, Loyalist Colonel John Boyd, leading approximately 700 men from North Carolina, marches south to join Campbell in Augusta. Campbell anticipates Boyd's arrival as critical to maintaining control. Patriot militia leaders learned of Boyd's march through reports from their scouts. So with a combined force of approximately 400 men, they move to intercept Boyd before he can reach Augusta, aiming to disrupt consolidation and protect Patriot settlements in the Georgia backcountry. By mid-February, Boyd's Loyalists camp at Kettle Creek, a swampy, wooded area with a small stream, unaware of the approaching Patriots. Patriot Colonel Andrew Pickens plans a three-pronged assault and is set to lead the center column with one on his left and right effectively encircling the camp. At approximately 10 a.m. on the 14th, Patriots fire on Loyalist sentries, alerting Boyd of the attack. Boyd rallies his men, forming a defensive line on a hill near the creek using trees for cover. The Patriots advance, with Pickens' center engaging first, drawing heavy fire. After less than half an hour of intense fighting, Boyd is fatally shot in the chest by a Patriot rifleman. His death causes confusion amongst the Loyalists, who begin to waver. The three columns converge, overwhelming the now disorganized Loyalists. Pickens orders a final charge and routs the enemy within an hour. 70 Loyalists are killed compared to under 10 Patriots, and the Patriots seize Loyalist supplies, including some 40 horses, muskets, and food. The victory sets back British plans to reinforce Augusta with Loyalist militia, and within hours of receiving news of the rout at Kettle Creek, Campbell orders an evacuation of Augusta, beginning the retreat with his 1,000 regulars to head to Savannah. In a slight digression, the same day, but across the Pacific, Captain James Cook, the English explorer and navigator, is killed by native Hawaiians during his third visit to the island group. This event isn't necessarily part of our story, but I just had to include it. Upon initially arriving, Cook and his compatriots are welcomed as gods for their technology and bizarre attire, and for the next month they exploit the Hawaiians' goodwill. However, Cook's arrival brings with it infectious diseases that devastate the native Hawaiian population, and as one of the crewmen dies, exposing that he and his men are in fact mortals, the relationship turns south. The explorers try to flee, but rough seas damage their ship, and Cook and his men are forced to return to Hawaii, where they try to negotiate for peace, but end up shooting a chief. And the Hawaiians return the favor by stabbing Cook to death in front of his men. A few of Cook's men are able to escape and limp the ship home after shelling the shores from the safety of their ship, killing and wounding many and leaving the Hawaiians suspicious of white men for generations. Back to the west, where Clark arrives within sight of Vincennes by evening of February 23rd, capturing 2 French hunters who confirm Hamilton's presence at Fort Sackville. He orders his men to march in a circular pattern with multiple large flags to exaggerate their numbers, deceiving the British into believing he has 500 to 600 troops, though in reality he's got less than 2. Clark sends a demand for Hamilton's surrender, beginning the siege by positioning riflemen around the fort and firing on its defenses with rapid reloads, again bluffing the size of his small detachment. The fort holds through the night, but the next day, Clark raises the stakes. When Hamilton sends out a party of 25 Indians and French militia, Clark's men capture several, and he orders his men to take 5 Indian prisoners and execute them by tomahawk within view of the fort to intimidate Hamilton. That evening, Hamilton requests a parley, and Clark negotiates terms, demanding unconditional surrender, but agreeing to treat the garrison as prisoners of war. At 10 a.m. the next day, Hamilton surrenders Fort Sackville, marching out with 79 men. Clark takes possession, raising the American flag above the fort once again and renaming it Fort Patrick Henry before he secures Hamilton and other key officers as prisoners. He orders repairs to the fort and assigns Captain Leonard Helm to command the garrison with 40 men, while sending Hamilton and 26 others under guard to Williamsburg, Virginia. Clark's men prove to both sides that the Patriots can do the impossible, and ushers in the beginning of the end for British domination in America's western frontier. Deception, violence, and finally diplomacy proving to be highly effective means of capturing the disputed lands in the West for the outnumbered Americans. On March 6th, Washington writes to Major General John Sullivan outlining preparations for an expedition against the Iroquois in New York and Pennsylvania to counter British and Indian raids on frontier settlements as they have presented a larger threat last year. The Wyoming Valley Massacre and the Cherry Valley Massacre sticking in recent memory. Both have dealt heavily publicized damage to American settlers and Revolutionary soldiers. In the letter, Washington also plans a bit of subterfuge, saying, "Nothing will contribute more to our success in the quarter where we really intend to strike than alarming the enemy in a contrary one, and drawing their attention that way. It will be a great point gained if we can, by false alarms, keep the force already in Canada from affording any timely assistance to the savages, refugees, and those people against whom the blow is leveled. I would wish you to keep the motives of your journey to headquarters a secret, because if it is known that an officer of your rank is to take a command to the westward, it will be immediately concluded that the object must be considerable." On March 11th, Congress establishes the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to help plan, design, and prepare environmental and structural facilities for the U.S. Army. The Corps is a body made up of civilian workers, members of the Continental Army, and French officers, and the Corps plays an essential role in the battles to come. On March 29th, Congress adopts the regulations for the order and discipline of the troops of the United States, commonly known as the Blue Book, and orders its publication, resolving to print 1,000 copies. This coming after the notable success von Steuben had at training the Continental troops at Valley Forge last year. It includes 63 pages of regulations and instructions on everything from bayonet use to latrine placement. This adoption professionalizes and standardizes the entire Continental Army and becomes a staple of military training for centuries, the most recent revision of the Blue Book being released in 2024. I have the entire book on our YouTube and Rumble, and it takes about an hour and a half to listen to in full. It can, of course, be a little dry in parts, giving specific guidelines for how to march and quarter, but here's a little sample showing the type of instruction given in the book.
The choice of non-commissioned officers is also an object of the greatest importance. The order and discipline of a regiment depend so much upon their behavior that too much care cannot be taken in preferring none to that trust, but those who by their merit and good conduct are entitled to it. Honesty, sobriety, and a remarkable attention to every point of duty, with a neatness in their dress, are indispensable requisites. A spirit to command respect and obedience from the men, an expertness in performing every part of the exercise, and an ability to teach it are also absolutely necessary. Nor can a sergeant or corporal be said to be qualified who does not write and read in a tolerable manner.
Now back to our story, where in May a notice appears in the New Jersey Gazette saying on Tuesday the 11th instant, departed this life at his seat in Hopewell, John Hart, Esquire, the representative in General Assembly for the county of Hunterdon, and the late Speaker of that house. He had served in the Assembly for many years under the former government, taken an early and active part in the present revolution, and continued to the day he was seized with his last illness to discharge the duties of a faithful and upright patriot in the service of his country in general and the county he represented. The universal approbation of his character and conduct among all ranks of people is the best testimony of his worth, and as it must make his death regretted and lamented, will ensure lasting respect to his memory. In his time serving in the New Jersey Provincial Congress, he was designated to sign the new money issued by the state of New Jersey, signing 25,000 notes himself. In December of 1776, as the British were invading, Hart hid wherever he could in the woods, sleeping in caves and making a rough shelter in the Sourwood Mountains, only returning home after the American victories at Trenton and Princeton. Last year, he had offered his farm to Washington, and some 12,000 men camped on his fields before heading to Monmouth. John Hart died, likely of kidney stones, on May 11th. On June the 1st, the court-martial of Benedict Arnold convenes in Philadelphia. After a relatively clean record in the early days of the Revolution, Arnold is charged with 13 counts of misbehavior, including misusing government wagons and illegally buying and selling goods. General George Washington issues a reprimand against him, though he is allowed to continue his service in what proves to be a near-fatal instance of forgiveness. June the 2nd finds Washington en route to the Hudson Highlands. He writes to Congress summarizing his strategic shift to defend West Point and the Hudson River, noting the Army's ill-prepared state, but emphasizing the critical need to defend the area despite the risk. On the 18th, Major General John Sullivan departs Easton with approximately 2,500 troops, marching northward toward Tioga to rendezvous with General James Clinton's brigade. Washington's orders issued in May are very clear. The immediate objects are the total destruction and devastation of their settlements and the capture of as many prisoners as possible. It will be essential to ruin their crops now in the ground and prevent their planting more. He further specifies that Sullivan should lay waste to all the settlements around and ensure the Iroquois are driven to such a distance as they can never recover their losses. As he says, the campaign's primary goal is to cripple infrastructure, but by resorting to such extremes, Washington hopes to break Iroquois morale and discourage future attacks. On June 21st, Spain declares war on Great Britain, though Spain's king, Charles III, does not consent to a treaty of alliance with the United States. Enemy of my enemy is my friend. The revolution has already spawned a world war. between the two international powers of Britain and France, and Spain's entry into the conflict ensures the British will have to spread their resources even thinner. Washington, now at West Point, establishes a headquarters and learns of Spain's declaration of war on Britain, his optimism for British defeat increasing. On the third ever anniversary of Independence Day, which falls on a Sunday, the holiday is celebrated on the 5th. Celebrations take place on both sides of the Atlantic as Benjamin Franklin hosts a celebratory banquet in Passy, France to mark the occasion. Throughout this time in Paris, Franklin has been attending salons and negotiating loans, and for months has been switching from the books he's studying to the faces of those he's speaking with. This leads to Franklin either constantly removing his glasses to see the person he's speaking with or squinting at the text he's reading. And while he's in France, he has an idea and begins experimenting with lens combinations, beginning another pet project to keep his mind busy. We now head back to New York, where the war has been locked in stalemate. Mirroring the American strategy for dealing with the Indians, British strategy shifts to punitive raids against Patriot coastal towns to disrupt supplies, punish rebellion, and force American forces to disperse. Former Royal Governor of New York, Major General William Tryon, specifically advocates for a war of desolation to break Patriot morale by targeting civilian infrastructure. Tryon's fleet anchors off West Haven on July 5th, landing 1,500 troops under his command at 5 a.m., while his second-in-command lands 1,100 at East Haven. 200 Patriot militiamen fight, offering light resistance, firing from trenches but retreating as Tryon advances. By noon, New Haven is occupied, with Tryon's forces looting homes, seizing provisions, and burning wharves and ships. 2 days later, Tryon lands 2,600 troops at Mackenzie's Point, facing heavier resistance than in New Haven. Patriot militiamen fire from houses and barricades, killing 5 British and wounding 20 in the initial skirmishes. Tryon's forces push inland, capturing Fairfield by evening, with 15 Patriots killed and 20 captured. They now begin looting, targeting homes, churches, and public buildings, and angered by militia firing from within homes, a violation of Tryon's view of a civilized form of warfare, he orders most of Fairfield burned. Tryon re-embarks by noon, leaving Fairfield in ashes. Tryon then lands his 2,600 troops again on the 11th, advancing on Norwalk, where he receives very little initial opposition. By 8 a.m., militia engage from houses and heights, killing 10 British and wounding 25 in sporadic fighting. Tryon's forces overrun the town by noon, again looting extensively. Tryon returns to New York on July 12th, reporting to General Henry Clinton that the raids destroyed 257 houses, 182 barns, 95 stores, and other structures across the 3 towns. Clinton, based in New York, receives Tryon's report with unease. Clinton favors conventional military engagement over Tryon's scorched earth tactics, fearing they alienate potential loyalist support and escalate Patriot resistance. Propaganda goes both ways in this war, but the actions of Tryon's mid-July campaign require no embellishment to stoke the anger of Patriot fighters. On July 14th, afflicted with a severe case of gout, George Ross passes away. In 1776, he was elected to the Continental Congress while serving as a provincial legislator and a colonel in the Continental Army. His strong stance for the colonist freedom led to the greatest contribution he made by being one of the 9 signers of the Declaration of Independence from Pennsylvania. He also undertook negotiations with the Northwestern Indians on behalf of his colony and took a seat as vice president of the first Constitutional Convention for Pennsylvania. He is the 5th signer to die, and one of only 9 who never see the independence they sought fully realized. On July 16th, American Brigadier General Anthony Wayne launches a covert attack on British fortifications at Stony Point, New York, acting on orders from General Washington. The British fort on the cliffs overlooking the Hudson River is seen to threaten West Point, which is only 12 miles upriver. Under the cloak of darkness, Wayne leads 1,200 light infantrymen on an assault the British think is impossible. In just 30 minutes, moving silently and using only bayonets, the Patriots take the fort, killing 94 British and imprisoning 472. The fort is razed and the surrounding area is evacuated of British troops. It's now the peak of summer, and in Tioga, Sullivan and Clinton combine forces, totaling approximately 4,000 to 4,500, forming the largest American army yet assembled against the Iroquois. The combined forces advance 12 miles north from Tioga to Chemung, a native village where they encounter light resistance from 200 to 300 Iroquois warriors and British Rangers under Captain Walter Butler. After a brief skirmish, Sullivan's troops burn the village, including 40 houses, and destroy surrounding cornfields and orchards. 2 weeks later, as they move further north into Indian lands, Sullivan's army engages approximately 1,000 Iroquois warriors and 250 British loyalists in the Battle of Newtown. The Iroquois attempt to ambush Sullivan at a fortified ridge, but American artillery and flanking maneuvers force their retreat after 3 hours. Following the victory, Sullivan's troops destroy the nearby Seneca village of Newtown, burning houses and razing extensive cornfields and vegetable farms. Throughout this summer, John Paul Jones, a captain in the Continental Navy, has been operating out of France with a small squadron to harass British shipping and disrupt commerce. His mission, authorized by the Continental Congress and supported by the French government, aims to draw British naval resources away from American waters. On September 23rd, a British merchant convoy of 41 ships carrying naval stores from the Baltic approaches the Yorkshire coast under the escort of the HMS Serapis, captained by Richard Pearson, and the Countess, captained by Thomas Piercy. The convoy protected by these ships is critical for British naval supplies, prompting Pearson to protect it against Jones' squadron, which has been spotted off the coast earlier this morning. Jones' squadron has also sighted the British convoy, and Jones signals his ships to form a line of battle. Combat begins in the evening as the Bonhomme Richard, Jones' ship, closes within musket range of Serapis. Jones fires on the Serapis, but 2 of his 18-pounders in the lower deck gun burst, killing crewmen and disabling those heavy guns, reducing his effective armament to 12-pounders and small arms. Pearson returns fire with Serapis 18-pounders, splintering Bonhomme Richard's hull and killing several crew. After 30 minutes of maneuvering, Jones attempts to board the Serapis, but Pearson's superior speed and gunnery keep them apart. Jones orders grappling hooks prepared, aiming to lock the ships together. Jones rams Bonhomme Richard's bow into Serapis' stern, locking the ships with grappling hooks despite Pearson's attempt to break free. Now within earshot, Pearson demands Jones surrender, to which, the story goes, Jones replies, "I have not yet begun to fight." While the quote is exceptionally famous, it's not recorded from Jones himself, and his men claim to have heard him say, "I may sink, but I'll be damned if I strike," or some other defiant expression. The ships are now lashed together, bow to stern, in a brutal, close-quarters fight. The rival crewmen fight hand-to-hand across the decks, while French Marines in the tops snipe British soldiers. A grenade thrown by an American sailor, William Hamilton, ignites the Serapis gun deck, causing an explosion that kills 20 to 30 crew and disables several guns, and the ship's mainmast is damaged by American cannon fire. After 3.5 hours of bloody and chaotic fighting, Pearson, with the Serapis battered, mainmast failing and over 100 crew dead or wounded, strikes his colors and surrenders to Jones. The Bonhomme Richard's flag, which was shot away earlier, is re-raised by Jones' crew in triumph. Jones transfers his crew and prisoners to the Serapis as the Bonhomme Richard sinks despite efforts to save her. In the chaos, the convoy carrying British supplies scatters and escapes to the Yorkshire coast, but Jones claims the Serapis and the Countess as his prizes. Back in Philadelphia, the city grapples with soaring inflation. The Pennsylvania Constitution empowers constitutionalists, led by figures like Joseph Reed, president of the Supreme Executive Council. They push price controls to curb profiteering, clashing with constitutionalists who favor free trade and defend property rights, including those of accused loyalists. James Wilson, a signer of the Declaration of Independence and a prominent lawyer, angers radicals by defending 23 suspected Tories in court, securing their acquittal from property seizure and exile. Constitutionalists see this as a betrayal, and resentment over the verdict boils over. On October 4th, 200 militiamen gather at Burns Tavern, fueled by both liquor and Reed's anti-Tory rhetoric. What they lack in a clear plan, they make up for in anger, and they march to arrest profiteers and loyalist sympathizers, targeting Wilson in particular. The mob captures 4 merchants, marching them down 2nd Street. At the City Tavern, Robert Morris and John Cadwalader confront the militia, demanding the prisoners' release, but the radicals press on, shouting, "Get Wilson." Around 30 men, including Wilson, retreat to his 3-story brick home, dubbed Fort Wilson after the siege. The militia, armed with muskets and a small cannon, surround the house by noon, while inside, Wilson's group barricades doors and windows. Lieutenant Robert Campbell leans from a 3rd-story window, shouting at the crowd, and a militia bullet kills him instantly. The mob forces the back door open with crowbars, but gunfire from the staircase and cellar windows drop several of the attackers, scattering the rest. Joseph Reed arrives on horseback with the 1st Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry, ordering the militia to disperse, and the cavalry charges, slashing through the crowd. Reed, a constitutionalist himself, moves to restore order, fearing broader chaos. The Fort Wilson riot is a great window into the deep fractures among even the patriots, split on issues of class, economics, and visions for the future of the Republic. For the conservatives barricaded in James Wilson's home, the riot reinforces their fears of unchecked democracy, that when it's unleashed without restraint, it risks spiraling into chaos and mob rule. For the constitutionalists driving the militia's march, the riot's abrupt end by the Philadelphia City Cavalry provides a different lesson. Even sympathetic leaders like Joseph Reed will prioritize stability over their radical ideals when pressed. A strong populist push can rally votes and stir many men to action, but it also risks being reined in by those wielding the power and the authority, limiting the implementation of a radical vision. Despite the violence, the rioters are granted amnesty in an attempt to quell the violence rather than escalate it. It's October 4th, and Washington writes to Estaing, saying, "New York is the first and capital object upon which every other is dependent. Both Washington and the British are highly aware that its capture could turn the tides of the war." In his long letter, Washington writes that he has not concealed the difficulties in the way of a cooperation, but has the highest hopes of its utility to the common cause, and its contribution to ending the war victoriously. The plan will have to wait, as Estaing is set to return his ships to France before the hurricane season begins, and once there, the French government assembles troops and another fleet to return to North America. On October 7th, Sullivan's army returns to Tioga, having completed the destruction of over 40 Iroquois villages and thousands of acres of farmland. The campaign leaves the Iroquois without food reserves for winter, forcing survivors to seek refuge with the British at Fort Niagara or flee further westward. Sullivan notes minimal resistance after Newtown's victory in August, with most villages being abandoned before their arrival. On October 9th, a combined American and French force of approximately 5,500 troops launches an assault to recapture Savannah from British control. British forces numbering 3,200 under General Augustin Prevost defend fortified lines with artillery. After 90 minutes, the Patriots and French retreat. British General Henry Clinton, based in New York, receives intelligence on the successful defense of Savannah and begins planning a major Southern campaign to exploit the Patriot weakness. He writes to George Germain outlining a strategy to invade South Carolina, targeting Charleston with between 8,000 and 10,000 troops. Another signer of the Declaration, Joseph Hughes, passes away on November the 10th. Congress resolves to attend his funeral, but the site of his grave is now lost to history. Hughes lived a solitary life. His fiancée had died before they were wed, and Hughes remained a bachelor for the rest of his life, never having any children. In a letter predating the signing of the Declaration, Hughes wrote of his reluctant support for the action. On Monday, the great question of independence and total separation from all political intercourse with Great Britain will come on. It will be carried, I expect, by a great majority, and then I suppose we shall take upon us a new name. In November, George Rogers Clark, while stationed at the falls of the Ohio River, writes a detailed letter to George Mason on November 19th, recounting his Illinois campaign and outlining plans to secure the territory in the Northwest, while also requesting 300 to 400 reinforcements from Virginia for a Detroit expedition. On December 1st, the Continental Congress formally appoints John Adams as Minister Plenipotentiary to France, replacing Benjamin Franklin as chief negotiator for peace with Britain. His commission, issued last month, states his role is to negotiate a treaty of peace and a treaty of commerce with Great Britain, in case the said power shall recognize the independence of the United States. Congress is already planning for a win, though we have a bit more to cover first. In mid-December, Thomas Lynch Jr., the second youngest signer of the Declaration, is in Boston, boarding the Polly with his wife. He signed the Declaration in '76 after being elected in place of his father, who had contracted a fever while serving in North Carolina. He too has now grown ill and has decided to travel to France on advice of doctors, but sadly he never makes it. The Polly is lost at sea, and all on board are assumed dead. A seventh signer of the Declaration now gone. On December 23rd, James Robertson, a 37-year-old North Carolina farmer and militia leader, arrives at the French Lick on the Cumberland River with a party of 256 men, women, and children, after a brutal 400-mile overland trek. The group has come out here seeking fertile land and safety from British allied Cherokee attacks. Robertson's party crosses the frozen Cumberland River and soon begins constructing a stockade on a bluff above the river's south bank. The fort is named for General Francis Nash, a war hero who was killed in action 2 years ago, and Fort Nashboro is born. Nobody at the time, of course, can imagine the longevity of their settlement. Constructed originally as a safe haven from the war and growing over the following years, later to be renamed Nashville. On December 26th, British General Henry Clinton and Admiral Marriott Arbuthnot set sail from New York City with a force meant to overwhelm the small Patriot infrastructure in the South. 14 warships, 90 transports, 5,000 muskets, artillery, and approximately 8,500 troops are all prepared for an invasion of Charleston, South Carolina. By December 31st, the fleet is at sea and battling severe storms that scatter ships and delay arrival for a precious few months. And that is where our story ends for today, but don't worry, we will be back tomorrow with another episode covering another year. I hope you enjoyed our retelling of our story in the year 1779. It's been a year of military cunning and escalating tactics, a year of discovery and of loss. 1779 is a pivotal time where the future of America remains unsure. But with the joining of Spain in defiance of Britain, confidence for the final claiming of freedom is on the rise. Make sure you check out our X today for paintings depicting some of the events we covered and photos of a rare copy of the Blue Book, And tell your friends why you're all of a sudden fascinated in the revolution. Word of mouth is the best way for a podcast to grow, or so I'm told, and unlike many shows, this one comes with an expiration date locked and loaded. Our final episode will premiere on the 4th of July 2026 and will commemorate our quarter millennium of freedom and excellence, and I can't wait to present the completed project for people to listen to for years to come. Next, in 1780, a year that slams America with gut-wrenching lows, small and hard-earned victories, and a betrayal so infamous it's echoed through history for centuries. Send us a message to keep the conversation going and head down to the comments and let us know what you learned, what you enjoyed, or what we got wrong. And as always, thanks for listening.